Hi, I'm Wesley with TreeNewal. Welcome to today's episode. I'm here with Ron Schmidt. He is a councilman with the city of Argyle, Texas. So, Ron, welcome. Glad to have you here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So, do you want to tell us a little bit about your history with the city of Argyle and how you got kind of wrapped up in in the trees?
Well, absolutely. I ran the first time in 2017 and was elected with an overwhelming majority against my opponent. But trees has always been a very important part in my family's life, essentially. We moved from Highland Village, which has a lot of trees, obviously. And so when we came to Argonne, one of the things that became apparent to us is that it had a lot of beautiful trees. And I learned a lot more about trees. The fact that we have majority of them are post oaks and that they can be very sensitive to disruption, construction, things of that nature that has to be taken into consideration. And so probably about, I think it was 2018, 2019, I sponsored a tree committee to be founded to start the process of looking at how we could evolve our ordinances and do so in such a way that would work in harmony with development. And that's the key thing, because sometimes it's not structured in such a way that it preserves some of the natural beauty of a community. But I honestly believe that it can, and so that's what I did. Our current incoming mayor, Rick Bradford, was the one that ultimately chaired it with a group of citizens, which then led obviously to, or not obviously, but led to tree ordinances that got included in our ordinances that we have today.
Right. So, have you had good feedback from your constituents on the new tree ordinances, or have you had any pushback from any of the developers?
I think there's always an amount of education that has to come along. The unique thing about Argyle, I don't think it's necessarily only Argyle, but trees have a tendency to grow in clumps to protect themselves, and so strength in numbers. One of the things about Argyle that I don't think a lot of people know is that we have one of the largest densities of trees in the North Texas area, where 31% of our area is essentially covered with trees. And so that becomes a little bit challenging when you have owners that have a treed piece of property that are looking to develop it. But I think it can be overcome, and working hand in hand with developers, incentivizing developers to preserve as many trees as possible. So while some communities are looking at it more from a punitive standpoint, I think it's the wrong way to do it. Is to essentially incentivize the developers to preserve as many of the trees that we have. And when it's not possible to do so, we also have a way that we could mitigate some of the loss into what we call a tree fund that we can use then to repopulate trees into areas that are not affected by development.
Well, that's great. Educating not only your constituents so that they understand how important it is. A lot of them just inherently know that it's important, and they value that high level of tree cover and the kind of small town feel that gives your city. But going ahead and getting the developers educated into it and how it can benefit them is important too.
Oh, absolutely. And there's some good initiatives at the federal level I just found out about, where there's $1 billion available as a matching program. So currently we have over $300,000 in our tree fund. And if it works out, we could possibly get matching dollars from the federal government, which would then stretch it to $600,000. And I've worked with some HOA presidents to see if they would essentially have adopt a tree type program, to where the challenge becomes is, where do we relocate those trees? And obviously they need to be planted properly, they need to be cared for properly, but to preserve that tree canopy in the long run. So some trees, they have lived a long time, and there's nothing wrong with replacing them with new young trees, but it has to be done in a very planned manner.
Yes.
And conscientious about the overall environment, because removing some trees has sometimes a trickle-down effect too.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a lot of effects to, heat island effect, air pollution mitigation, stormwater runoff. Trees have a lot of value in an urban area, aesthetically, property values, economic benefits from shading and evaporative cooling. And so they're definitely an asset that you have to protect.
Yeah, there's the quantitative and qualitative values are staggering, and there's some statistics which I don't necessarily want to, hang my hat on. But we sponsored a study, I think it was probably 2019, subsequent to this tree committee recommendation that took a look at Argyle in general, and I think the structural value of all of our trees was close to $500 million. But it doesn't end there, because the runoff protection that you get from trees, which sometimes is much more important and very hard to quantify, that is much more meaningful than trying to assess the value of a tree. I think we all know that if you had two equal lots, if that's such a thing that's possible, one was heavily treed and one was not, the one with tree is going to be of greater value.
Definitely more desirable in our
Oh,
area.
absolutely, absolutely.
And you hear that from I hear that from customers on a regular basis. I bought this I bought this lot because of these trees.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's and unfortunately, the property that we ended up buying, which is about 7 acres, did not have as many trees on it. So every year we probably buy about 30 to 35 trees. And it's a challenge to grow, new trees, and that takes education. And I know you all come down to my place and looked at some of the sick trees that we've had, and you all doing a super job in the community to educate, and as you did recently in a meeting hosted by the mayor. But there's a lot of education that needs to go hand in hand. It's the citizens or the residents as well as the developers. I think the developers just need to know that it's important in our life, and they're much more likely to work with you then. And again, if there's ways that we can encourage them, incentivize them to preserve as many trees, it's a good thing. Also, even during the construction process, we have learned so much. Post oaks, you have to stay away from them as much as possible. And if we can preserve some of these, what we call majestic trees, that are deemed to be majestic because of their size and age, those really become almost landmarks.
Yes. Yeah, those trees that you're talking about, post oaks of that size, they're typically well over 100 years old, and they're completely irreplaceable, at least in our lifetimes. Maybe our great grandkids will sit under their shade one day. But what ways do you balance the growth that the city needs with preserving the trees in Argyle? Because that's a selling point for your city, and you don't want to disrupt that.
No, not at all. We can't stop the evolution of our town. It's a natural thing. It's something that we need to embrace and welcome. When we have developers knocking at our doors willing to provide us with amenities that we really need, we just need to be able to educate them that, hey, among other things, trees is a very important thing for us. So work with us. Most of them are very willing to do so. Most of them are. Understand it's a business for them. So we just have to be realistic. And we've learned ourselves as a town that, you can be too restrictive and essentially, make it more difficult on developers than it needs to be. But again, working with developers, educating them, most of them are willing to do the right thing. So I think that's the direction that we've gone. We've educated ourselves. We have been identified as one of the Tree City USAs, and that was an accomplishment. We're also Scenic City as well. But I think developers have come to understand that the aesthetics, the natural beauty is a big, important thing for our citizens. And like I said, most of them are willing to work with us.
Okay, well that's great, because it takes everybody working together, especially with sensitive species like we're dealing with. These post oaks, as you mentioned, they don't tolerate disturbance very well, and
no, and you can't buy a post oak either, right? You can't go to a nursery.
Can't. No, they grow so slow. The nurseries will never make any money on them, and they don't transplant well, so there's a low survivability.
Exactly, and like to your point, I mean, a post oak might only be 12 inches in caliper, well over 100 years old. Yep. They don't really show the age that they are.
No, I have a lot of reverence for them for having survived so many tough times in harsh conditions, and they still come out looking great on the other side. And until we mess with them, that's when they start heading south.
Yeah, we started seeing some of the other species that are more common and popular planted by developers. Some of the red oaks, for example, didn't survive that recent freeze that we had. And post oaks are very, very durable as long as they're left alone. And I think as long as we provide the perimeter for them to feel good, be happy, they can be a real value to development, to residents. And so I just think it's the education process that needs to come along.
Well, I happen to think that they're as close to an ideal yard tree as you can get, because they form good structure, which helps insulate them from storm damage. They grow slowly. They don't need a whole lot of inputs unless we're messing with them. They provide good shade. They don't have an invasive root system. There's just a lot to like about having them on your property.
Right.
They attract wildlife. The wildlife love.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's, always one of the downsides to some development is some evolution has to happen, and some of the wildlife will be affected. But this is, again, where we just, as a community, we're taking an active role, which I think we have, to not only educate ourselves, but also educate, those that are coming to our community, whether it's for development or just to live, that trees are an important part of our ecosystem.
Absolutely. So what are some of the benefits of the municipal arborist partnership in terms of cost savings, environmental problems, things like that, environmental protection?
Well, I think it's the most obvious is the education process. I mean, I'm not an arborist, and I've learned the hard way some of the things that that I've learned about trees. But working sort of as a catalyst between the town and developers and residents, just like what you all did the other day, that was awesome. To educate the residents on trees, how to grow trees, what affects trees, and allowing the residents essentially to understand that better. So when a developer comes to present their project, there's not this apprehension or pushback. It's just essentially we're approaching this from an educated perspective. And if you think about it, just about anything that we're faced with in life, if you're more educated about something, you're going to deal with it in a much more proactive and logical manner.
Well, TreeNewal, it's in our mission statement to educate, and it's really important to us. And we do get an opportunity to do that one customer at a time when we're going out and meeting with people on their properties and answering their questions. But it's also important to us to be able to reach out to the public in a broader way. Opportunities like speaking at the town hall and having opportunities to touch organizations is something that's important to us, and we would like to continue to do with the City of Argyle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been working with one of your principals for, gosh, I don't remember how many years now, but he recently kind of educated me on the City of Denton having a very proactive kind of a program, sort of a adopt a tree program. And we have made some progress in that direction, but I don't think it's gone far enough that we essentially are going to take this $300,000 or hopefully $600,000 of tree reforestation fund and repopulate those trees within our community. And so he's been amazing in educating me, and that's one of the things that I want to push forward in the future, that we look at our program or create a tree adoption program that we can use to retain our canopy throughout our town. Again, our trees are growing in clumps, and that is what it is. So if we have to replace trees, that's a natural part of progress. It's not a bad thing. And doing so just needs to be done in an educated way. It allows those that want to have forward progress to see forward progress, but at the same time, those that want to protect our tree canopy, they're also achieving their goal as well.
Right. I think it's a good point you bring up, that not only do you have to put new trees in, but you have to maintain what you've got. And that's one place that I've seen some municipalities make mistakes is in their budgeting process. They have a lot of money allocated to planting trees, and they have very little allocated to maintaining the existing trees. And they're not static. They're dynamic living things, and they're constantly changing, and they need maintenance. And so I think that's one way that the city of Argyle can kind of lead by example, would be to make sure that these trees have some allocations for maintenance, and that would be part of a bigger plan, because like you said, you can't do this without a good plan.
No.
And having a good plan is critical to being able to maneuver all of these dynamics between the builders and the newly developing city and the existing infrastructure and the trees and the residents.
Yeah, and particularly a small town like Argyle. I just read our agenda coming up, and we're going to recognize that we officially are like 5,600 residents. I mean, that's, for us, it's a big milestone. But at the same time, we're so small that we don't really have the opportunity to have a resident arborist. And this is where someone like your firm can essentially, I think, serve a great purpose in educating our town, working with our town, because you guys are on the forefront. You see this stuff all the time. And I think being an integral part of preserving our tree canopy is going to be a big bonus to us. And so I'm excited about the future. We have learned a lot. We've put a lot of things in place, but it's because of folks like you all.
Well, TreeNewal calls Argyle home, and we're proud of that. And we have a vested interest in watching the city of Argyle grow, and we're going to be there to help.
Yeah, and I think we're just lucky that you are that close to us and taking an active role in preserving our tree canopy. And I'm just looking forward to taking the next step and making everybody feel comfortable that we can preserve our trees, but yet maintain a forward momentum on evolution and development as well.
Great. Well, we'll be there to support you every step of the way.
Well, we appreciate it.
All right. Well, I appreciate you joining me here today, and I look forward to doing this again.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Great. Thank you, Ron.